idea of activating collections and how collections have, have almost an energy beyond their own kind of world is something that unfortunately, with the Garden Palace and losing those objects, we weren't able to track and to continue to watch. And as we know, collections grow, they change, objects and the way we view them changes over time as well. And this idea is very much what our next speaker, Cara Pinchbeck, will be looking at. Before, we've had some comments before about how the art gallery, of course, really in many ways stepped up to fill the void. So almost 80 years after the Garden Palace, Tony Tuxon, this institution, the art gallery, steps up to the challenge and starts to fill that void and starts to tell the story of Aboriginal art. And it's this connection that, that is of course why we're here in this organisation and what Cara's going to speak about. So some of you would know Cara's the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander curator here at the Art Gallery of New South Wales. And of course, quite recently, some of you would have seen some of the shows that Cara has been working on, including When Silence Falls last year on Level 2, which was an extraordinary exhibition, again looking at this idea of almost unspoken stories. And then in 2013, I think one of the most remarkable exhibitions I've ever had the pleasure to see with the Yirrkala drawing exhibitions, which I think was just a landmark exhibition for all of Australia. So I'd really like to welcome Cara up to talk today.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. As a Gamilaroi woman, I'm also a visitor to this country, and I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal clan of the Eora Nation on whose country we're gathered today. And as Jonathan said, today I'd like to refer to some of the foundational works in the Art Gallery of New South Wales's collection and to consider how the context of these works has shifted over time and the ways in which these works remain relevant today, particularly to the communities from which the works have come. And as Michael Brand and Stephen Miller outlined this morning, and Jonathan's just referenced, the gallery's collection in many ways was developed as a result of the devastating fire at the Garden Palace. And while this did not lead to the immediate acquisition of Aboriginal works for the collection, we were fortunate in the 1950s that our then Deputy Director, Tony Tuxon, formed a partnership with the orthopaedic surgeon, Dr. Stuart Scougal, and together they set about developing a collection of Aboriginal art for the gallery. At the time, Aboriginal material culture was very much considered the domain of the museum and was predominantly presented in an anthropological context, or, as in the case of the Garden Palace, in the ethnographic court, which has so many contexts and, problems associated with it. And Tuxon and Scougal appreciated the artistic qualities of Aboriginal art, particularly from Northern Australia, and in 1958 they travelled to Milakarpiti on Melville Island, one of the two Tiwi Islands, to commission these monumental Tutini or Pukamani poles for the gallery's collection. And there was a question this morning about the first works that came into the gallery's collection. These weren't the first works to come into the collection, but they were the first works to be specifically commissioned because they were by Aboriginal artists. The first work to actually come into the collection by an Aboriginal artist was a work by the Hermannsburg painter Edwin Perultja titled Mulder Gorge from 1947, and that work was purchased by our Works on Paper department because it was a beautiful watercolour rather than because it was by an Aboriginal artist. And then that was followed in 1948 by 3 gifts of small carvings by the artist Lingita Craigie and Nora Nathan from Cloncurry in Queensland that Preston gifted to the collection. Subsequently, we received a gift of works from the Australian-American Scientific Expedition to Arnhem Land, and that was a gift from the federal government. It was part of a larger collection that was distributed to all the state institutions in Australia at the time, and that came into the gallery in 1956. So these Pukamani poles that we're looking at here are actually the first works that were actively sourced for the gallery's collection by Tuxen and by Scougall. So in 1958, Tuxen and Scougall actually travelled to Milikapiti on Melville Island and worked with the artists there to determine the most relevant works that should be made for the gallery's collection. And through these discussions, it was decided that the artists Laurie Nelson Mangatopi, Babwan Apurtimi, Jack Urunga, Don Barakmajwa and Charlie Kwangdini would make tutini for the gallery's collection. And they decided to make these Pukamani poles. And the Pukamani ceremony is actually a funerary ceremony held many months after a person has passed away, and artists are commissioned by the family to create these tutini to be erected for the final burial of that person. And then on the Tiwi Islands, these tutini, these amazing objects, are left to the elements to just weather and wear away. And to designate a shift between the tutini made for ceremony and those made for external contexts, such as these works for the gallery, the artist consciously decided to alter the medium used for the Pukamani, using ironwood rather than bloodwood, which is reserved for ceremonies. And this is a division that continues to be maintained by Tiwi artists working on Melville Island and Bathurst Island today. And in making the works for the gallery's collection, certain cultural processes were followed, as would be followed in an actual Pukamani ceremony. And here we see Laurie Nelson Mangatopi painted and working on one of the tutini in the gallery's collection with Jack Urunga watching on. And Tuxen and Scougall witnessed this entire process and really were able to see and have a comprehensive understanding of the relevance of the tutini, how they were made, why they were made, who was making them, and they were able to capture this moment by having William Dalzell there to fill the entire process, and that has been turned into a short documentary, and the gallery is really fortunate to hold an original copy of that documentary in our collection. And Tuxen and Scougall were very hands-on in acquiring these works for the gallery's collection, even to the point, as we see here, of packing the works for their safe transit to Sydney, and they're wrapping them in paperbark so that they'll be protected travelling down from Melville Island down to Sydney. When the works arrived in Sydney, they were given pride of place in what are now known as the Old Courts, the original galleries in the Vernon Wing, which Stephen referred to this morning, with their high ceilings and ornate architecture, a really dramatic contrast to the context and the location in which the works were made. And Tuxen was clear that these works should be appreciated as art and be presented as such. This thinking was extremely progressive for the time, as Aboriginal art and material culture was considered, as I've said, to be very much the domain of anthropology. And this was, as we can see in some of the media comments that arose when these works were presented at the gallery in 1959, it arose a lot of discussion and controversy. And I have to say I love these words by Douglas Stewart, where he writes, carved by such surprising newcomers to Australian art, the 17 grave posts from Melville Island make a somewhat bizarre display. And most people, admitting that the poles are delightful in themselves, will wonder if the proper place for them is not in the museum. And he goes on, if they are to remain in the gallery, and they will certainly be of interest to visitors, it might be better to distribute them around in odd corners instead of displaying them so prominently, or at least to move the entire Aboriginal collection to some place where it will not clash so violently with the infinitely more sophisticated works nearby. So these words really give us a sense of the time, of the thinking, and of the reception to these works presented in the Art Gallery of New South Wales in 1959. And obviously, not everyone agreed with Tuckson's approach at the time. However, he was resolved in his appreciation and presentation of these works at art, and in doing so, the Art Gallery was among the first galleries to present Aboriginal works as art, not by removing or ignoring their cultural context, but by appreciating the works for their aesthetic qualities and for being able to see them alongside other fantastic works of art from across the world. And this is something that the gallery is extremely proud of, and something that has been much written about and talked about. However, I feel we must balance this appreciation and appeal with the ongoing connections to the works held by the Tiwi people of Melville Island, as it's really their cultural inheritance for which the gallery acts as a caretaker. And earlier this year, the First Nations Canadian artist, writer and curator David Garneau spoke at the Encounters Conference in Canberra about Indigenous curation, and he defined this as a curation of people rather than things, explaining that from Latin, curator is linked not just to object care, but to healing and curing, and that rather than cure objects in the sense of preserving, he spoke about Indigenised curators healing the estrangement between people and their belongings, to restore and restory. And I think such an approach really respects the ongoing rights of Aboriginal communities to their material culture and recognises that cultural authority over art does not diminish merely because a work has entered an institutional collection. For me, I think it allows the development of a reciprocal partnership that draws on the expertise of both parties for mutual benefit. So by working with the cultural custodians of these objects and enabling them to have a voice and an opinion and a role in how we present, talk about and discuss these works, that can be for everyone's benefit. And this has certainly been the case with the Pukamani poles in the gallery's collection, where we've been able to ensure that the current generation of artists working at Milikapiti have access to this material and are able to work with us to ensure that we are presenting and discussing the works in a manner which is appropriate for them today. And in 1998, the artist Pedro Wanamiri first travelled to Sydney to view the works from 1958 in the gallery's collection, and then he created a body of works for Perspecta in 1999, which are now held in the gallery's collection. And he's continued to visit Sydney since and to work with us, and particularly with Jonathan, to inform us about the 1958 Pukamani poles and to really deepen our understanding of those works and to ensure that we speak about those works in a way that the community of Melville Island want those works to be spoken about today. And we've got extensive interviews with Pedro talking about these works, talking about the Pukamani ceremony and talking about culture for Tiwi people. And here I have just some of his words where he talks about seeing those works from 1958, because obviously no works from that time period still remain on the island. They've been weathered away and worn away. So he says, I was surprised to see them. They were really old and the artists who made those poles are all dead. So it's good that the gallery has put those poles in their collection for the family. In 30 years' time, 40 years' time, those kids can come down and see those poles there because they are the family of those people. And he goes on, we younger ones must follow their footsteps so our kids and their kids can see what we are doing and can understand. And I guess it's Pedro's hope that in future years his children and grandchildren can come here to see his works in the collection and have the same response and connection to his works in generations to come. And as we've heard many times today, the Pukamani poles are really central to the gallery's collection of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander art and on permanent display currently in our 20th century Australian galleries, alongside artists who were also practising in the 1950s, including Tuckson himself. Also included in that space are bark paintings acquired for the collection immediately after the Pukamani poles were acquired. In 1959, Tuxen and Scougall travelled to Yirrkala in northeastern Arnhem Land and commissioned major bodies of work by the leading artists in the community at the time, including Malwalam Marika and Munguruoi Yunupingu, for the collection. And we can see Tuxen here with those artists in Yirrkala in 1959 with one of the Bart paintings by Wanjak Marichka, which is currently on display in our Australian galleries. And working directly with the artists, Tuxen realised that their works captured detailed cultural knowledge and that each work depicted only a portion of the information held by each artist. With this in mind, he acquired bodies of work by each artist to ensure that a comprehensive visual record of the cultural knowledge of each was captured. And here we see him talking to Munguruoi Yunupingu about his work, Hunting Scene, 1959. This insight and thoughtful approach has provided the gallery with an exceptional collection of works that, when considered alongside the Pukamani poles, provided a firm foundation onto which our collection of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander art could be built. Their approach to Aboriginal material culture as art now prevails, and these early works are central to our Aboriginal collection, but also our Australian and wider international collection. And while much has been written of Tuxen and Scougall and what they've really been lauded for their approach, I feel we cannot simply sort of sit on the actions of the past. We must also ensure that these collections remain relevant today. And I guess as an Indigenous curator, most important to me is making sure that these collections are managed in collaboration with the Yirrkala community and that the care of these collections aligns with the community's wishes. And while this is quite straightforward in regard to the Pukamani poles for Pedro Wanamiri, Waka Murungu, who's, sorry, I forgot I had more slides there. So these are some of the works on display. You can see that work there by Maulan Wanjaka and Maraman Marika being painted, and the finished work on display in the gallery. And so Waka Munungu is one of the cultural leaders in Yirrkala today, and he collaborated with us on the Yirrkala Drawings exhibition, which Jonathan referred to before, which was held here in 2013-2014. And here you can see Waka entering that gallery space with Yalpi Yunupingu and Gunabi Ganaba, welcoming people to the exhibition with song and performance. And while, when we were doing this exhibition, we created a number of filmed interviews with the artists, and Waka spoke about the drawings that were made at Yirrkala in 1947 and made certain comments about those works, which really refer to all art that has come out of Yirrkala and continues to be produced in Yirrkala today. And he challenges us to employ the power of art for more political aspirations and purposes. So I'd like to play that interview for you so you can hear Waka speaking and see him speaking.
My name is Waka Munungur, and I'm from the Japo clan. My father is Wongo Munungur. He is the great artist, the great leader in this region for many, many years. I'm the last son of Wongo. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I see and how I feel about the tradition paintings, all the artworks. He was an anthropologist earlier who came to Arnhem Land. He did some work with our old people, with the crowd. When I first saw that, I felt that those paintings are real. They talk about people, they talk about land. It has meanings and stories to go with that painting. That's how Yungo sees. And it's really, really secret. and it's important and it's powerful to Yolngu people. See that pole over there? This one here? That's my painting. That's who I am. And it represents my land. That Wonderway. It talks about the river, the land, the nature. And it's really important. I have that painting all the time in me, wherever I go. I can't lose it. The painting that you see today in the bark paintings or whatever, we have it all the time. It is in our body. Whatever we do, the painting is there. That represents who you are and what we are and what clan we come from. When you write a story, you write it on a piece of paper. But ours, we have it here in the knowledge all the time. And the only time we put it into public is when we do it on art, larakik or paintings. We are connected to every land, every rocks, whatever is in the land. And I feel proud of it. It is our power. It is our backbone where we belong. To you, maybe it looks it's just a beautiful picture and it doesn't talk about anything. But to Yolngu people, we know. We know that it talks about a particular place, who owns it, and where his cultural site is or ceremony. It's all there. We know. There are layers and layers and layers and layers. Whatever old people has taught us, we still have it. We'll pass that knowledge to our next generations. But the thing that worries me, and maybe to other people, Yolngu people, if today our arts are sold all over the world, some are in gallery, big cities, but we don't get much out of it. You know that Yolngu has been here for a long, long time. Why is it Yolngu? Our law is not recognized in the parliament. If our paintings are recognized in the galleries, but our law is not recognized, we can respect your world, your law, that come all the way from England. But what about the real Australian law, the real Australian people, our law? We should be recognized. I'm asking you, if the government can't recognize, or what are the art galleries, get the information and pass it on to government, that this is what we are let down on.
I have to say, I don't necessarily have the answers to Waka's challenge, but I think it's important to consider that we must continue to question the nature of collections and to endeavour to align the relevance of each collection with the understanding, aspirations and wishes of the communities from which they are drawn. Waka and his generation want to take an active role in how they and their visual culture is perceived by others, and it is our hope that working collaboratively can be the catalyst for further understanding and inspired action. Waka clearly reminds us that the role of art within Indigenous culture is not something that is nice to look at. It is so much more, and now that galleries have a clear appreciation of Indigenous art as art, we must continue to challenge understandings and once again use these words to enact change. And I would encourage you to consider Waka's words when you next view the bark paintings from Yirrkala in the 20th century Australian galleries, or the sculptures that Munguruwa, Yunupingu and Malawan America made at the same time that are currently on display in the Yirragumbana Gallery exhibition Sentient Lands, and just think about how we look at art, how we see art, and consider that the way we're viewing these works is not necessarily the same as others, as the communities from which the works come view these works, and hopefully over time we can use all of these works in different contexts so that they're art, but they're also so much more as well, and that we can create a greater understanding of that. Thank you.